I learned the hard way that silence can be more violent than any weapon. The night they told me my husband died a hero, I, Peyton Adams, stood there listening to men who wouldn't even meet my eyes. Men who knew the truth and chose to bury it along with him. What broke me wasn't the lie. It was realizing they expected me to disappear with it, and for years, I did. Until the day a SEAL Admiral laughed in my face, asked my rank as a joke, and the name they thought they erased forever finally rose to the surface, dragging every secret they feared right back into the light. I reached Coronado at 5:10 a.m., slipping through the back gate while SEAL teams were already pounding across the sand, their breath mixing with the cold Pacific air. I never tried to blend with them. I kept my head low, my hands stained with grease, my clothes carrying the heat of machines that gave me an excuse to stay unnoticed. For 12 years, I lived by one rule. Don't give anyone a reason to remember you. That morning, the rule faltered. While checking an electrical panel in the tactical control room, I heard Jordan Keene behind me. Steady voice, sharp eyes, the kind that cut through quiet. You stand like someone who's run formations. I forced a small laugh, dipping my head, but I felt her studying the stance I never meant to reveal. Her gaze tracked down to my footing, as if she knew I wasn't just guessing where the room's exits were. I redirected quickly, pointing at the risk map. My mistake slipped out before I could stop it. This sector needs an auxiliary diverter. One failure and the whole wing overheats. Keene tilted her head. Where'd you learn that? Logistics? Just habit? I muttered. I left fast, heart thudding. Why had I let that surface? After work, I took Grace to school, listening to her chatter about tests and friends, her world untouched by the shadows trailing me. But that evening, when we returned home, an unmarked envelope waited on the floor. I opened it. Peyton, they've found you. Leave Coronado now. My hands trembled. 12 quiet years, and the past had finally begun to stir. The morning after the envelope appeared, I walked into the maintenance wing, expecting the usual quiet hum of machines and the comfort of being overlooked. Instead, the young soldier in charge of the security cameras watched me as if trying to place a memory she shouldn't have had. She asked whether I'd been the one who flagged yesterday's electrical risk. I kept my answer light, casual, hoping it would dissolve her curiosity. But she added that Commander Kashner wanted to know how I'd spotted the hazard faster than the engineering team. That question tightened something low in my ribs. On my way to the next building, a man in civilian clothes stepped into the elevator with me, an intelligence badge clipped neatly to his belt. He studied me with a familiarity I didn't return before asking if we'd worked together at Fort Bragg. I said no, keeping my eyes on the elevator doors. His smirk told me he didn't believe a word. Later that afternoon, while repairing a utility line deep in the lower levels, the sensation of being watched crept over me again, heavier this time, deliberate. I turned quickly, expecting someone standing there, but only caught a flicker of motion disappearing behind a concrete pillar. My breath caught, and for a moment I couldn't tell whether the chill in my chest came from the draft or from the truth pressing closer. That evening, when I opened my laptop at home, a faint, half-erased banner flashed across the top of the screen. Unauthorized access linked to your old credentials. The notification was gone before I could click it, but the words had already sliced through me. I hadn't used those credentials in 12 years. They weren't supposed to exist anymore. My heartbeat stumbled, without thinking. I dialed a number I had tried to forget, one that used to reach Task Force Griffon. The unit no longer existed, wiped clean from every record I had access to. But the phone rang, and someone picked up, breathing, no voice, like a ghost confirming it was still alive. I hung up immediately, staring at my shaking hands. Something had shifted. Someone, somewhere, had started looking for me, and they were close. Grace came home subdued, her steps hesitant. She pulled a wrinkled photograph from her backpack and placed it in my hand. It was me, years younger, in full tactical gear. Dirt smeared across my face. The rank patch on my shoulder had been cut away, leaving a raw, uneven edge. Grace asked if it was really me, her eyes glassy with confusion. I forced myself to shake my head, even as guilt scraped against my throat. She turned away, saying she wished I trusted her enough to tell the truth. Before I could go after her, the base siren sounded from a distance. Messages started rolling across internal channels. Coronado had shifted into Security Condition 2. Someone had breached the archival servers. The year flagged on the alert burned straight through my stomach. 2009. The year I was declared dead. Whoever was searching wasn't just digging. They were reconstructing what had been buried with surgical intention. Hours later, in the quiet of my garage, I reached for my toolbox and froze. A small QR code sticker, clean, new, placed with purpose, clung to the handle. My palms dampened as I scanned it. A single line appeared. Ashfall never ended. The words dropped heavily inside me, enough to make my knees weaken. My phone rang. A blocked number. A whispering voice slid into my ear, low and urgent. "Don't let Admiral Briggs see your daughter." The room tilted. My fingers tightened around the phone until they ached. I knew then, whatever had been sleeping all these years had fully awakened, and it was coming straight for us. Coronado felt stretched thin that morning, as if the entire base had been tightened a few notches past safe. Word of Admiral Briggs's unannounced inspection spread faster than the salt wind coming off the water, and every hallway bristled with clipped orders and nervous energy. I tried to steer clear of the entourage, but my shift funneled me straight into the operations room where he was reviewing diagnostics with his officers. I kept my head down, shoulders rounded, wiping the edge of a control panel as if the smudge beneath my palm deserved my full attention. That routine had protected me for 12 quiet years, but the moment Briggs's shadow fell across the console, I knew that routine had finally met something it couldn't outrun. He paused directly in front of me, lips curling with amusement that didn't reach his eyes. "Hey, civilian. What's your rank?" Laughter burst through the room. Too loud, too eager, the kind people use to hide discomfort. I forced a thin smile, though my pulse banged against my ribs hard enough to make me lightheaded. I'd trained myself to go invisible, but suddenly every pair of eyes was on me. Then the laughter snapped off. A young officer near the door stared at me with a shock so pure it looked like grief. His lips parted, barely letting the word escape. Ashfall? My entire body froze. That name was a burial marker I never expected to hear spoken again. 12 years I'd spent burying it, burying her. Briggs whipped his head toward the officer, a quick, violent warning in his stare. Not confusion, not surprise, recognition. And beneath it, something darker. Fear. The room shifted. Conversations died. Air thickened in my throat. Then the monitors flashed red. Sirens inside the system, not the base, began pulsing. Unauthorized internal access detected. Files resurfacing from a restricted archive no one should have been able to touch. Briggs barked at everyone to step back, but the system ignored him. The screens flooded with a recovery script, dragging buried data back to the surface like bones rising from wet earth. One file blinked open. My name, my real name, shone across the entire operations wall. Major General Peyton Ashfall Adams, Task Force Gryphon, deceased. Someone inhaled sharply behind me. Another officer stumbled into a desk, but there was no sound in my head, just the dull roar of a life I'd tried to erase crashing its way back. Briggs turned fully toward me and took one step back, small, involuntary, but unmistakably born of terror, not discovery, recognition. He had known I was alive. He had known all along. The young officer planted a hand on the table, as if bracing against the truth unraveling in front of him. His voice trembled as he forced out the sentence that would haunt me long after that day. General Adams was never supposed to survive Ashfall. The words hit like shrapnel. 12 years of silence exploded in a single breath, and whatever thin shield I'd built between my past and my present shattered on the spot. Grace was unusually quiet that evening. her backpack held protectively against her chest, as if she were carrying something fragile. When we stepped inside, she hesitated before pulling out a crumpled envelope and placing it in my hand. "Someone gave it to me," she whispered, almost afraid of her own words. Inside was a photograph, a version of me I'd hoped existed only in old classified reports. I was younger, streaked with dirt and blood, eyes hardened by a mission no one was ever meant to discuss. The rank patch on my shoulder had been cut away deliberately, as if the sender wanted the truth visible but unspoken. On the back, in uneven handwriting, Major General Adams. Grace's voice cracked as she looked at me. "You said you weren't military." I opened my mouth, but nothing came. She pulled away, hurt and confused, and I felt something sharp tear inside my chest. My phone rang, unknown number. When I answered, a whisper cut through the line, low, direct, unmistakably urgent. Briggs saw the photo. "He knows your daughter." My knees nearly buckled. Before I could recover, Grace appeared again, this time holding a USB drive that should never have been touched. She'd found it beneath the toolbox in the garage, the one place I believed no one would look. "What is this? Why hide it?" My breath lodged in my throat as she slid it into her laptop before I could stop her. The video sputtered, warped by years of corruption, but the images were unmistakable. A moonless night, screams I knew too well, and then my husband, bound, dragged across dirt, thrown to his knees. I crumpled beside her, a broken sound tearing from me. Grace sobbed, insisting I'd told her he died in combat. I held her, unable to breathe under the weight of both her grief and mine. At the edge of the frame, a man stepped into view, only his jaw visible, but the Navy insignia on his collar clear as daylight. His voice carried the cold finality I'd never forgotten. "Finish it. No traces. She dies next." Briggs's voice. Grace trembled in my arms. "Mom, did they kill Dad?" I held her tighter, but inside, a chilling certainty settled. They hadn't failed to kill me 12 years ago. They simply hadn't finished. My inbox pinged, a secured base alert delivered directly to my civilian email, something that should have been impossible. Security breach. Target identified. Peyton Adams. At the bottom, ADM. Briggs notified. Grace wasn't just being watched. She was leverage, and Briggs was waiting for me to step into his trap. The morning after the video surfaced, the one that shattered whatever hope I had left, that my husband's death had been anything close to honorable, I tried to lose myself in routine, but tightening a single bolt felt like lifting a cinder block. My mind replayed the footage over and over until the garage door flew open. A young soldier rushed in, pale and breathless, telling me Admiral Briggs wanted to see me immediately. No written notice, no chain of command, just urgency carved into his face. My legs felt weightless as I followed him through the corridors. When he left me outside a sealed conference room, I forced a breath and stepped inside. Briggs didn't acknowledge me. He simply spoke into the air, as if reciting a line meant to break something inside me. "You survived longer than expected." The world tilted. That was the exact sentence the man who executed my husband whispered, before assuming I'd die minutes later. I gripped the back of a chair to keep myself standing. Then the screen behind Briggs flickered green. Without anyone touching the controls, the video from the night before began to play. Officers murmured in confusion. A lieutenant shouted that the file wasn't in the system. None of it mattered. The footage forced itself into the room. My husband, bound, beaten, dragged into darkness. A gunshot tore through the speakers. Silence swallowed everything after. Briggs didn't move. His stillness was a confession. The door burst open. A man in a dark blue suit strode in and flashed credentials. A Foci Special Agent Ramirez. He looked at Briggs once, then turned to me with a steadiness that made the entire room shift. "General Adams, we need to speak privately." Someone gasped behind me. Briggs's jaw clamped tight, panic breaking through his calm veneer. Ramirez led me to an interrogation room and placed a thick classified folder on the table. When he opened it, the words inside gutted whatever strength I had left. Your husband wasn't killed in combat. He was executed, and the authorization for ashfall came from Admiral Briggs. I felt the ground slide beneath me. Ramirez leaned close, lowering his voice. Peyton, Briggs never wanted you dead. He wanted you erased, because you hold evidence that could destroy him. The truth clicked into place, sharp and merciless. I wasn't a casualty. I was unfinished business. AFOC planned to extract me. But Briggs reacted faster. He ordered every SEAL commander to assemble in the MAPEX strategic room and specifically demanded that I be present. Keene tried to convince me to hide, but we both knew the cost. Briggs would go straight for Grace. When I entered the MAPEX room, conversations faltered. The air felt dense, electric. Officers studied me with a mix of confusion and dawning recognition. Briggs stood at the center, waiting. Major General Adams, step forward. Gasps rippled across the room. Instinct screamed for me to run, but 12 years of muscle memory pulled my spine straight. I stepped forward, reclaiming a voice I hadn't used since the world believed I'd died. Briggs launched clips across the screens, manipulated footage meant to frame ashfall as my catastrophic failure. He accused me of leading my unit to their deaths. I tried to speak, but he slammed the table and declared me a national security threat. Then the back doors opened. 2 military police escorted Grace inside. She scanned the room until her eyes met mine. Terrified. My voice cracked as I yelled that Briggs had no authority, but he claimed she was a witness he needed to secure. That word, witness, turned my blood to ice. Keene broke formation and stepped in front of Grace, refusing to move even as Briggs ordered her aside. The tension in the room snapped taut. Officers shifted uneasily. Some looked ready to intervene. Grace's whisper reached me, small but devastating. Mom, please. I understood then, if I didn't stand up now, there would be no later. Briggs stepped close enough that I could feel the venom in his breath. Ashfall never ended. Tonight, you die as planned. But before the threat could settle, the intercom cracked to life. AFOC units, stand by for entry. Every head turned toward the door. Briggs cursed under his breath, and I realized the trap he built for me had finally tightened. Around him, the doors of the MAPEX room locked behind Grace, trapping her inside with Briggs and the rows of SEAL officers who had no idea what they were about to witness. Briggs positioned himself between us, his stance sharp, predatory, like he'd already decided how this would end. Major General Adams, report your status. A chill rippled through the room. I stepped forward, letting 12 years of silence burn away. You killed my husband. You wiped out my unit, and you signed the order to erase me. The room shifted. Several officers backed away from Briggs. Shaken, I pulled the USB from my pocket and slid it into the tactical console. The ashfall footage erupted across the screen. My team ambushed. Support mysteriously withdrawn. My husband dragged off alive. And then the voice. She dies next. One officer whispered that the voice was Briggs. He lunged to shut it down, but the system was locked. Keene's doing, watching from above. Briggs snapped, calling me a traitor, accusing me of fabricating everything. I stood my ground. If I'm the liar, why forge my death? Why target my daughter? And why is AFOC closing in? Grace stepped forward, voice trembling but brave, saying she'd been followed and threatened. The room turned against Briggs instantly. The intercom blared. AFOC! Full entry! Briggs reached for Grace. I lunged first, commanding with a voice that cut through the chaos. Grace, down. And the entire room obeyed. Briggs never reached me. AFOC agents slammed him to the ground so fast, the room seemed to jolt with the impact. The sharp snap of metal cuffs echoed through the MAPEX room, slicing through what little denial remained among the officers watching. Agent Ramirez strode in with a command that filled every corner of the space. Admiral Briggs, you are under arrest for attempted murder of a United States officer, manipulation of classified records, homicide during active duty, and the federal intimidation of a minor witness. Briggs fought beneath the agents, screaming that I should have died, that none of this was meant to surface. His voice cracked with panic, exposing exactly what he'd spent years trying to bury. Ramirez cut him off, voice like steel. General Adams did not die. And from this moment forward, she is under the protection of the United States government. Slowly, the SEAL officers drifted to my side. Even those who had laughed at Briggs's mockery earlier couldn't meet my gaze, shame settling across their faces. Keene stepped forward and placed a steady hand on my shoulder. "You're not fighting alone anymore, General." The title hit me like a release valve opening after years of pressure. Ramirez handed me a sealed USB. "Everything they hid is on here. They meant to erase you. We won't let that happen." Then he added quietly, "Peyton." Briggs wasn't the only one. The final authority behind Ashfall is still out there. My heart stilled. The nightmare wasn't over yet. 2 months later, Grace and I left Coronado behind. It wasn't an escape this time, not a frantic sprint away from danger, but a deliberate step out of the place that had held my fear like a second skin. We drove north until the coastline softened into fog, settling in Monterey, a quiet city where the mornings wrapped the Naval Postgraduate School in a pale, peaceful haze. It felt like a doorway to a life I'd never allowed myself to imagine. When I walked into the lecture hall on my first day, I didn't shrink into the background or keep my gaze glued to the floor. I stood at the front as Major General Peyton Adams, ready to mentor the officers who would shape the missions of tomorrow. A young student rose from his seat and bowed his head, sincerity softening his voice as he greeted me. I returned his gesture with a smile I hadn't worn in 12 years. "I've spent enough time hiding." Grace waited in the hallway, sunlight catching her hair as she leaned against the window. When she saw me, her voice lowered to a whisper. "Mom, you're not invisible anymore." I took her hand, stepping forward with her into a future no longer shadowed by fear. For the first time in over a decade, I felt free.